Today we are exploring charisms and vocations as lay people and as people that want to live a religious life in the church, and how you kind of find your calling or your purpose within the church in your lay life, so without having to take vows. But I'm also going to tell you a little bit about how people that do take vows, how they choose what order they're going to go to, right? Because there's so many religious orders within the church for people that are going to become nuns, brothers, or priests, deacons, right? That sort of thing. But also, of course, your regular, everyday body of the church, the people that fill the pews, right? And there's ones that come every Sunday, and then as soon as Mass is over, they leave. Or there are those that really give their talents to the church for the good of either the church itself or the common good of the community that church serves. And we're going to talk about how the Holy Spirit helps you discern its purpose for you, His purpose for you, and how you can kind of understand how to utilize your talents, whether within the church to serve it in some capacity, lay or otherwise, and or use that same talent in the world to find fulfillment. You know, as Jordan Peterson often says, if you choose a job that's not well suited to you, you're in for an awful time, right? So it is best to choose a career that kind of works with the natural born talents that you were given. And Catholics believe that the Holy Spirit has endowed every person with their own unique list of talents that are meant to be used in a certain way or in any way for the common good of your community. So that is what a charism is. So a charism is the word for those talents that the Holy Spirit has given you personally, specifically, to use in your life, to fulfill yourself, to make a living, and to help your community. Some of them are spiritual, others are very practical gifts. All of them incredibly important for the church to survive, and it's why churches and communities, are able to survive this very sometimes scary world. So, first of all, let's first talk about vocation. So there's only a few vocations you can have, which is either being married or remaining single, being a priest or a religious person, right? Or just a plain lay person. So it's one of those four. But in terms of your charisms, those gifts are admin, celibacy, craftsmanship, discernment of spirit, encouragement, evangelization, faith-giving, healing, helping, hospitality, intercessory prayer, that's definitely my mom, knowledge, leadership, mercy, missionary, music, pastoring, prophecy, services, teaching, voluntary poverty, and wisdom. So for all those playing with tarot, New Age, and all those little neat tricks, you could have just stayed in the church and pursued prophecy, right? You could have worked on those charismatic gifts through the charismatic angle of Catholicism. So let's talk about Catholicism and its 52 flavors. If you think Baskin-Robbins had a lot of flavors, no. The Catholics are a very diverse group of people, even in religious orders. When you compare religious orders like, let's say, the Trappist monks, they're really good. Even the Carthusians. The Carthusians are, wow, they're intense. They basically put themselves in solitary confinement for the rest of their life. Honestly, they live in cloister. They each have their own cell, and it's like a cell. It's not like a nice room. It's a cell. And they're alone the majority of the day in solitary confinement. And the only time they work communally is when they're at Mass or when they eat or when they pray together. Otherwise, they live on their own, very solitary. Just to give you or even the Trappists. The Trappists are kind of cool because they're very austere. They're very strict. They're all about living a monastic life of poverty and humbleness, and manual labor is a big deal. But also, they're famous for their beer brewing. The Trappist monks in Belgium make the most famous beer in the world. And there's actually tunnels in Belgium that go from the brewery of the Trappist monks to certain pubs in the town or in the city. through underground pipe systems like water. So it's pretty intense. So there's something for everybody. When you're choosing a religious order, let's do that before we start talking about the lay stuff that the rest of us get to participate. When you're choosing your order, a lot of it depends on your charisms. So let me tell you how it worked for me. I don't know how they do it these days, but back in my 20s, I'm almost 50 now. Back in my 20s when I was in discernment, I would go to church every Sunday and I was very committed, but I wanted to be a nun and it was very airy-fairy, but I was still living, a regular secular life. I was going to the nightclubs on the weekend. I was partying hard, but on Sunday, very devout. And I went to my priest because I really felt like I was, having a calling and wanting to go deeper in my faith, and said, Father, I feel like I'm being called and I want to be a nun. And he rolled his eyes. He was an old Italian man. He was very austere, very traditional. And he said to me, Daniela, you don't start living a nun's life when you become a nun, eh? It's like you live a nun's life and then you become a nun. It's not the other way around. So show me that you're living a nun life and I'll take you seriously. But until you do that, I'm not interested. So you want to live a nun life? I want to see you here 6 o'clock every morning for Latin Mass and to receive the Eucharist. And I had a full-time job. So I did. I drove the 20 minutes to the Latin Mass every morning at 6 o'clock. I attended Eucharist every morning for 2 years before he would actually take me seriously. So I had to go to him. So the first time I talked to him, I asked him, he flat out said no, and basically, don't bother me. It's not for you. And he rejected me entirely. And I thought, maybe. And I didn't know that was what he always did. I didn't know this. So he rejects you flat out the first time to see if you'll insist. And if you don't insist, well, you're too weak-spirited, so you didn't really want it, right? So the first time he said no, I was devastated. Went home, cried. And then the next Sunday I came back and didn't say anything, but started going to church immediately after that, every single day. So then after, maybe a month or two, he'd give me a nod, but nothing more than a nod. And then after about 6 months, I went to him again. And he said, Daniela, a nun living is the rest of your life. So if you are going to do this, you're already living the life, keep living it. But, it's not like going to college where you apply and then in September you start and in January you're finished. He said, that's not how it works. He said, you start living it. And when the Holy Spirit thinks it's time, those doors will be open to you. But in the meantime, it's not for you to tell me when it's time for you to go to a convent. You don't even know what convent you want to go to. We don't even know what your charisms are. And I thought, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, what are your gifts? Like, what kind of nun do you want to be? And I wouldn't even know, would I? So he's like, please don't waste my time. Keep going to Mass. I'll tell you when you're ready. 2 years. I had to go to Mass every single day for 2 years before that guy would take me seriously. 2 years later, he sent me to Stella Maris in Toronto, which is like the grand poobah of nuns. And when you're there, you study religious life, but you start to learn about your charisms, to discern which order is best for you. And I remember I had to attend this thing where it was like a expo of nuns. So all these different orders showed up to show you their way of life, what they believe in, what charisms, are attracted to their order. And I couldn't believe the variety of them. So for example, and when you compare them, like where priests are concerned, for example, you get the Jesuits, right? They're really radical. Our Pope Francis is a Jesuit, so they're radical. They tend to be very liberal, very, very liberal. The Sisters of St. Joseph, the female version. So the Sisters of St. Joseph also incredibly liberal. If you take any friar that practices in the St. Benedictine way, which was incredibly austere, they live like hermits, right? And you talk to them about Jesuits, they'll roll their eyes. So there's definitely factions in the church. I'm not saying warring factions, but just very big differences in personalities. And again, those gifts that not everybody could live in cloister. I remember, and you shouldn't judge other people's gifts compared to yours. So for example, when I was going through that period of my life, right? And I really didn't understand vocations and charisms and, all of that stuff. So when they were talking that stuff to me, I didn't really get it. But I remember there were these two girls that were also part of my church, and they looked like little doves. They were innocent and pious, beautiful girls. I never spoke a word to them. I was so intimidated by them, and I felt so inferior to them. They were always veiled and quiet and meek, and the priest doted on them, and so I was a little bit envious of them. And I wanted to be like that, but that just wasn't me. I'm a pretty scrappy person, right? And pretty intense too. So I thought, I'm never going to be that. And I thought I needed to be that in order to be a nun. And I thought that that's why my spiritual director was rejecting me all the time. So then finally, so I stopped asking is what happened. I still went every day. I lived like I was living a religious life, but I stopped asking about it. It's funny that as soon as I stopped asking, that's when he called me into his office. So he says, okay, Daniela, now you're ready. Now you're ready. And I said, Father, I'm not. I said, that's why I've stopped bothering you. And he said, why? You changed your mind? You're still at church every day. And I said, not that I changed my mind. Is that I stopped asking you because I realized I'm not worthy. He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, those two girls are so sweet and quiet and whatever. And they're nothing like that. And I'm nothing like that. I'm so scrappy and, tough all the time. Like, I don't think I have it in me. And he laughed and he said, Daniela, he said, that's why we had to wait to find out what your charisms are. He's like, you don't need to be like them to be a nun. This is just going to inform what kind of nun we make you. He's like, those girls, yes, they're beautiful and they're called. He goes, and they're going to go to cloister. He goes, but Daniela, they're going to cloister because girls like that would not survive in the world on their own. The world would eat people up like that and just spit them out. Those girls are so pure, they can't be in a secular world. He goes, so we're going to put them in cloister. They have spiritual gifts of celibacy and prayer, and that's what they're going to cultivate. You're not that, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong, right? That when you look at, and that's when I started to learn about charisms. That, for example, even being a good admin person, who knew that being organized was a gift from the Holy Spirit, right? Or, for example, having leadership, being a missionary. Those girls could not be missionaries. You're not going to send a girl like that to, a country, let's say, that's being run by a violent dictator, right? Or in a place of war. They can't handle that. He's like, you could totally handle that. He says, so, Daniela, not all saints were Saint Therese of Lisieux. We also had Joan of Arc, and you're our Joan of Arc. We just haven't found the worry for you yet, So he really uplifted me. So to do my practice, to kind of really discern where my gifts were, they sent me to the Out of the Cold program to do security overnight. And we learned through that experience. I started doing hospitality because when you're a woman, that's what you do, right? And that's what we were providing. We were providing a hot meal and a place to stay. But we learned through that experience that hospitality I'm okay at. But what I was really good was talking down dangerous, violent offenders. Who knew? So I had this amazing gift with the schizophrenics, and there were many that were staying at the shelter every night. So I would stay up all night with them and help them discern what were hallucinations and what weren't. And I kept them company, and I uplifted them, and I made them feel better. So we learned that that was my gift. My gift was dealing with the people that other people were too afraid to love. My father was a career criminal. That doesn't scare me, right? I spent my whole life around really scary people that were lovely to me. So I saw a side of them that the rest of the world didn't see. And that has allowed me to see people, sometimes even evil people, as not so much evil, but tragically hurt and wounded. And that will sometimes make you vulnerable to evil. So I was able to have a compassion for that and deal with that kind of personality. That's a pretty neat vocation, but I almost never even gave myself a chance to explore it. And that happens so often, is that we find a little bit of dryness in our practice, or we're not sure what our purpose is, or, where we should be doing and where we belong. So then we give up entirely and start looking outside the church. because we only know the 5 things our mother taught us or Sunday school taught us, and we don't realize how complex a system the Catholic Church actually is. I did a quick search on all the different lay orders. So forget religious orders. All the different lay orders, societies, associations, clubs, whatever, within the Catholic Church. 43 pages. 43 pages of them. So I can't even give you a fulsome list. Start looking. And every church has its different group that they, affiliate with. So for example, in my parish, we're the oldest parish in Canada. And we have a really strong Catholic Women's League. So they basically run the church and organize everything. And we have a league that does a lot of advocacy overseas for sustainable practices and civil liberties. So we have a group in our church that are very strong, protecting farmers in countries that are being, for example, victimized by industry. So, we do a lot of that stuff too at my church. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. It's just learning what you're good at, and that's your purpose. So it's just about finding your talents. So if you're an organized person like Eric at our church, then you are doing our books. You're in charge of counting the money every Sunday and, keeping our accounting organized. We have a group of experts in our church on building in our parish, not in my church, but in our parish, that are like infrastructure experts. So they're in charge of organizing repairs that have to happen in our churches to make sure, that they're all standing straight and doing well. Craftsmanship. You don't think of craftsmanship as a gift to the church, but it is. Think about our churches, how beautiful they are, right? Beauty is a really big, important part of our church. Our church, like St. Louis, my church, St. Louis de Montfort, many people credit him for starting the Renaissance because of how much of a supporter of the arts he was. And he built so many beautiful religious monuments and statues and churches. He built so many churches, that guy. You know what I mean? So he was all about that. So he employed, half the artists in France, and that started the Renaissance. So very important. Beauty is very important to us. Just being encouraging. Evangelization. That's what I'm doing right now with these podcasts, right? Evangelization. So there's so many things. Hospitality. My stepmom, not Catholic, she's a Christian, a Messianic Christian. She used to own restaurants, and when they retired from that, it was kind of missing from her life. So she started doing hospitality for her church. So she would do breakfasts, and then they would do homeless breakfasts, and then she would, do these big Bible studies that came with dinner, whatever. That was all her, so she started organizations just around her love of cooking. Started things in her church, clubs in her church for that. So it was, beautiful to watch. So whatever you're good at, there's room and it will benefit the church. Basically, there's 2 charisms. They're either spiritual or for the common good. So your spiritual gifts are people like those girls, amazing at praying, right? Maybe they have prophecy, they can see things, they're spiritually sensitive. My whole family are mystics. So I come from an old line of Catholic mystics that would see auras and dreams and visions and all sorts of stuff. So that's very easy to cultivate for myself. Quite startling for my mother because that's something she's never allowed in her own experience. But now that she's praying 3 rosaries a day, you can imagine the sort of things that's triggering. And it's been quite startling for her. Think, am I losing my mind? It's like, no, Mom, you're not hallucinating. Welcome to what your mother was going through. And, even in terms of your personalities, there are some, think of Bishop Barron, right? You've all heard of Bishop Barron. He's so lively and happy, and there's so much joy, in the way he speaks. And he's inspiring, and he makes you feel all warm and fuzzy about God, There's that personality. But then you get personalities like Padre Pio, who reminds me of my grandmother. That was really, really tough. If you didn't give a full confession, he'd throw you out of church and yell at you and embarrass you in front of everybody, right? So there's room for that austerity too. One of my best friends in my church Joseph, he is incredibly austere and very, very strong in his faith, and he's very serious. He takes his faith very serious. It's not a laughing matter. Bishop Barron is to be happy and joyful. My friend Joseph's charism is to ensure that we're accountable. Because sometimes happy, joyful people like the Jesuits like to bend the rules or evolve. They're all about evolving the church, right? So they try to be open and happy and liberated, but that sometimes, could easily make you fall into heresy, where my guys like my friend Joseph that are theologians, even though he would never call himself that, and they know the church so well, and then, they know spiritual life so well, they'll be the first to call something out and say, hey, that's just warm fuzzy, but doesn't necessarily serve the Holy Spirit. But I feel like we need that personality in the church too, so that those of us that sometimes run ruckshot over things because that's our charism, is to be joyful and happy and just whatever, be open-minded. Sometimes we need a little bit of restraint, and that's not going to come from us intrinsically. So we depend on the rebuking of our friends like Joseph to say, hey, tone it down, or that's not quite proper in the mass, or whatever. And again, like, there's positive and negative to everything. Bishop Barron, his infectious love truly inspires everybody. I can listen to Bishop Barron all day and never get tired of him, right? Where someone who's really serious and austere, let's say like Taylor Marshall, right? Like Dr. Taylor Marshall, and I'm a big fan of Taylor Marshall, but he's so about the accountability and he's so serious that he can be divisive. So it's one of those things that your charisms, like anything in life, come with a warning label. So if you tend to be austere and serious, fantastic. There's a place for you in the church. You're needed, you're loved, and you're welcome. But guys like Bishop Barron might teach you to include a little bit of joy in your day-to-day life, and I think that's a good thing. And then vice versa. If you find yourself very carefree and open and fun and jovial, fantastic, great. The church needs that. At the same time, don't let yourself take it to the point where your religion is a joke. So it's about finding that middle ground, like any other thing in life, like any other personality trait, like any other gift. It doesn't mean that because you maybe are prone to the arts and because you're so artistic, maybe you're not so great with numbers, that doesn't mean that you never get your taxes done because you're not good at doing them, right? You still have to be in the world and live in the world. So that's an important thing too. So when you're exploring your charisms, it's not to say, well, the Holy Spirit made me good at this, so I'm going to do this and nothing else. And I'm not going to improve on all the areas I suck at. No. All right, Catholicism is, at the end of the day, once you take the religion out of it, the best self-improvement program you could ever join. So every area of your life technically can improve. But the great things about the way we view life is instead of making you fit into one box, which is often what religion is accused of, that's not the case at all. We are a huge room with lots of boxes, and look at people like Mother Teresa. She didn't fit in a box, so she made her own box. Many religious orders that you see, and even the lay clubs in the church, were started by people that just weren't being served spiritually with what was available. Mother Teresa was technically, I think, in cloister, or at least there are very strict rules in her order that she was not supposed to leave her convent. And she used to do it all the time against the rules. She would break the rules. And her charism was to physically serve people, and then was to evangelize and fundraise in the sense of going after governments and mobsters for money. She was a tough broad. And when the church said no to her, she did it anyway. And she insisted until she got her own order. There have been some people that have gone into their religious order, found they didn't like what they saw, and then ended up starting huge reformations of that order, right? So, your charisms can even make you start things, even make you rebel. Padre Pio was a huge saint rebel in the church. The church was constantly having to censor that guy because he was so outspoken and so energized. But that energy, even with all the pushback he was getting from within the church, he built hospitals, orphanages. That guy did so many things. So there's so much available to you. If you're politically minded, there's definitely a space for you in the church. Look at all the work we're doing in advocacy for the preservation of life, for example, for human rights. So it doesn't matter what you're interested in, making sandwiches or changing the world, changing laws, it doesn't matter. You want to do the books or you want to paint pictures. It doesn't matter. There's a place for you. Like I said, even those of you that are studying New Age and psychic stuff and transcendental stuff and Kundalini yoga, all of that is a poor demonic substitution for charismatic Catholicism, which is still alive and well in the church. Now, you've got to be careful. Charismatic Catholics are treated very strictly because for your own protection, you start getting visions and things. You want to make sure it's from the Holy Spirit and you're not being tricked. So charismatic Catholics have to work under very stern spiritual direction, again, for your own protection and the protection of anybody that might be coming to you or around you, for example, that you might be prophesying to. I really believe charismatic Catholics should be almost put in cloister. You know what I mean? But anyway, if that's something that you're interested in, there's a place for that as well. You don't have to go to New Age. You don't have to, listen to this Abraham Hicks nonsense. In the church, you'll actually learn about that charism from an organization that has 2,000 years of experience with it. You're going to get some dingbat off the street that read 3 books and now thinks they're an expert. Or you can go to an organization that is the one that cultivated this gift in the first place for the world, right? So they know you want to learn psychic stuff, go speak to a charismatic Catholic, right? You don't need to go New Age for that sort of stuff. So there is something for even the most avant-garde, spiritually obscure talent. There's an order for that somewhere in the church, I guarantee you. So I guess my call to you today is to look up what charisms are and the different charisms that the Holy Spirit offers and which are the ones that stick out to you. I mean, that's the first one. Saying, well, I'm really good at numbers or I'm really good at hospitality or whatever. Because many people don't realize that hospitality is actually a gift of the Holy Spirit. Right? You just think, I love to cook or I love to entertain. Yeah, because it's good for the common good. And people coming together in communion is a service to God. So the Holy Spirit blessing you with the willingness or the desire to do that is for the common good of everybody around you. It's definitely a gift. And it's one that's taken very seriously in the church. Right? You go into the CWL and tell them you have hospitality charism, pooh, they're gonna embrace you with open arms, right? So it doesn't matter how practical or how mundane you think it might be to you. If you have a talent in that area, the church will help you find a place to use it in a way that's beneficial for your entire community. And don't feel bad if you miss the boat. Like I failed miserably in my 20s. After all those years, I think I was 6 years in discernment, and I was just ready to choose my order right at the time. And then, the scandals happened and I left the church, which was my big regret, huge regret. I was so weak. Here I was thinking I was, rightfully angry, and me leaving the church was a positive protest. Instead, all I did was abandon it and help the mess last even longer. But anyway, I missed my vocation. So here I am at 50, married, so I missed that boat. You know what I mean? I missed the celibacy boat. I missed the vocation boat. I missed the nun thing. And it is a huge, huge regret in my life. But it doesn't mean that God can't restore it. So what's God doing now? Using me as a married person, lay person within the church. I am the bell ringer at Canada's oldest parish. They hadn't rung bells in a very long time. So I brought the church bells back to town, which hopefully will call people back to the church. I'm a member of the CWL, but the Catholic Women's Leadership Foundation, I'm so grateful just gave me a scholarship, and I've started my reformation at St. Paul's University. Actually, just started this week. So I'll be continuing my formation through St. Paul's in a leadership program. I've amassed a lot of success in media with my political work and my corporate work. So now I'm trying to apply what I've learned there in my media production. I own a film company, you know what I mean? And my business partner is a Catholic, a practicing Catholic. So for us right now, we're trying to figure out, okay, we made it in politics and we made it in corporate, how can we use all these gifts to benefit the church? So we're actually pivoting our business model a little bit so that we can create more faith-based content. Well, there's my charism coming alive. I have a gift for media, clearly evangelization, and, my failure in life as not becoming a nun turned into a success in the sense that, now I actually own a media company that gives me a platform and the tools to live out my charism, which I think right now, the way it's looking, is evangelization and leadership, teaching, that sort of vibe, right? Anything along that line. So hopefully St. Paul's University at 50 years old, starting again, I am going to figure out how to apply my charism to a vocation and how to make my lay vocation feel more like a religious one, just by living it that way. Just like that first priest told me the first time he rejected me, live like a nun and then you'll become one, as opposed to try and become a nun so you can live like a nun, right? So sometimes we approach things backwards, and I certainly did at that time. So I guess my advice to you would be, again, Google the charisms of the Catholic Church or the charisms of the Holy Spirit and see which ones stick out to you. And once you figure those out, you will be well on your way to either choosing an order that might suit you, a vocation that might suit you, a secular vocation that might fulfill you, and it's happily ever after. Be blessed.